Hey, history fans, welcome back to World History by a Jew. It's been a little while since we were together. My break went a little bit longer than I thought it was going to, but I'm ready now. We're going to finish up our Bronze Age Collapse series, and to finish up the Bronze Age Collapse series, I'm actually going to end it with a mini-series. So this is a two-way mini-series. One, I've called it the Samson Mysteries because we're going to actually be building to biblical Samson. But at the same time, we're going to be talking about the Denyen Sea People. And you'll see how the two, although we're kind of going to do this towards the end of the mini-series, and to come back and do this, and we're going to see how the two of them intersect. I'm going to do this mini-series a little bit different than my normal lectures. So first of all, we're going to have multi-parts, and I'm not exactly sure how many parts we're going to do, but it's going to be shorter than you're used to. I'm basically building one really long lecture, but it's too long to put into one single lecture. So I just want to see what happens. We'll do some smaller lectures. Instead of me releasing a lecture every week or two, I'll try releasing a lecture every 3 or 4 days until we get it finished. And I'm going to end with some cliffhangers. So on any of my normal lectures, you'll see I have a clear start and a clear ending. It's going to be a little bit fuzzy with this. I just want to try it out and see what it's like when I have shorter lectures with cliffhangers and have them come out more frequently than normal, and just see how it goes. I'm not committing to anything different. I've had people tell me to try it, and I figured we'll see how it goes. This mini-series is going to be a tale of two halves, and by that I mean the first half is going to be mostly secular history and just a little bit of Jewish content sprinkled here and there. Then the second half of the lecture, as we're bringing Samson into it, you'll see it's going to be more of Jewish history with a little secular content. And as I said a couple minutes ago, we're going to bring it all together. If I had to compare this to some of my other lectures, I had the King Tut trilogy. When I started off with the King Tut trilogy, it was just supposed to be about King Tut and his father Akhenaten and his grandfather Amenhotep III, and I thought at one point that was going to be one lecture, and I realized it was too long, so I split it into 3. I think it ended up being like 3 hours of content. You can look up and see on my YouTube channel. Kind of the same idea here. I don't know about 3 hours of content, but definitely well more than one lecture. So those 3 were all connected, and it really helped to see from one to the other. It'd be hard to just see one of them. So I've kind of sort of done this before, but this is going to be a little bit different because those 3 parts of the King Tut trilogy had a clear beginning and end. This will be a little bit different. And then it's not, what I want to do is really dig into the archaeology stuff, especially this lecture and the next one. I'll really be digging into the archaeology, and we'll be looking at a lot of maps and some rather obscure finds, in the sense that I think that there are archaeological discoveries you've never heard of, even if they're very significant. And this connects most similar to my oldest image of Jews in Merneptah, which was, I'd say, one of my 2 or 3 personal favorite lectures I've ever done. So if you haven't seen it, I ask you to check it out. But it doesn't have any connection to this other than the style has some similarity. So I think that's enough of the introduction. It's about as long as my intros can get. Let's hop right into the lecture. We're going to start off this evening with Greek mythology. So I want to talk about a mythological Greek king named Danaus. Now, Danaus started off ruling Libya, and his parents and grandparents were rather well connected. They were the founders of Egypt, of Sidon, which is in Lebanon, Libya, and much more. Okay, so his brother is Aegyptus. Everyone's going to say, well, that's the king of Egypt. Not at first. He actually was the king of Arabia. And so you've got this powerful family all ruling the countries around the Eastern Mediterranean, all well and good, right? But then one day, Aegyptus, the brother who rules Arabia, decides he's going to invade Egypt. So Arabia isn't enough for Aegyptus. He wants Egypt too. Right now, since Danaus is ruling Libya, he now feels like his space could be invaded, right? Aegyptus has taken over Egypt. He's right there at the cusp of entering Danaus's territory, but that's not Danaus's greatest concern. His greatest concern is his 50 daughters. Because Aegyptus has 50 sons, he wants to marry Danaus's 50 daughters. So to save his daughters, Danaus flees. He flees from what's now Libya and sails across the Mediterranean and lands in Greece, specifically in Argos. And when he lands in Argos, the king of Argos, the people of Argos, agree to take in Danaus and his 50 daughters. But guess what? Aegyptus really wants his 50 sons to marry Danaus's 50 daughters. So Aegyptus's sons invade into Argos for these daughters, and realizing that there's going to be a war, and a lot of the Argives, the residents of Argos who've been so good to his family, a lot of them would suffer through this war. Danaus decides to let his daughters marry these 50 sons. But Danaus has a plan. Danaus is going to allow his 50 daughters to marry the 50 sons of Aegyptus, but he orders his 50 daughters to kill their new husbands on the night of their wedding. And 49 of those daughters obey him. By the way, there's one version where it's 48, but there's 49 of those daughters obey him, but one, Hypernestra, disobeys her father's order, and she lets her new husband live. And this is Lynceus. And the reason she spares Lynceus is because he's respectful for her. More specifically, he honors her chastity, and she cannot go through, she thinks he actually maybe is a decent guy, and she just cannot go through with murdering the poor guy. So now we're going to jump ahead. So so Lynceus is still alive. The other 49 sons are gone. What happens after this fateful night? Okay, so initially the gods are going to forgive these 49 daughters of Danaus, and they all end up finding husbands, and that's another story, but they all end up finding husbands. And they're not punished for murdering these 49 husbands until their afterlife, in which case Hades gets a hold of them, and they have this punishment that they need to wash their sins from the river Styx. So they're ordered to fill up a bathtub, but that bathtub has a hole in it. So for all eternity, so to speak, they're trying to fill up this bathtub to wash away their sins with the water from river Styx, but that bathtub has a hole in it. So as they fill it up, the water runs out, and this goes on and on and on. Okay, that doesn't really pertain to our story tonight. Let's look at Danaus. So Danaus had a couple different endings depending on which version of the story. One is either he was killed by Lynceus, so this one of the 50 husbands that was spared either killed Danaus, or Danaus lived the rest natural life and died a normal natural death, so to speak. By the way, this is normal with these Greek myths. You have kind of different avenues and different ways the stories are told. So you'll see this a lot as I go through this mini-series and I talk about the different Greek traditions. Danaus, though, more significantly to us, is that he's credited with founding the Danaoi people. So the Danaoi people were from Argos, and their name is linked, etymologically linked to Danaus. And specifically, that one daughter who disobeyed, Hypernestra, well, her line, so her and Lynceus stay married, and their line becomes the kings of Argos. Also, we're going to come back to this in the next couple lectures. So what you see, these last three lines here on this, well, I should say really the last two lines on this slide are going to keep coming back for the entire length of our mini-series. So you're all asking the same thing. What in the world does this Greek myth have to do with the Bronze Age collapse? And then, how is this connected to the Bible? And that's what this mini-series is about. All right, so this is the last time I'm going to show you the slide. Even though we have several parts of this mini-series, this is my last intro to the Bronze Age collapse. If you want to know the details of the Bronze Age collapse, well, I highly recommend you watch my Bronze Age collapse introduction, which is Z08 on my YouTube channel. But for those who just want the short version, the Bronze Age collapse refers to the end of a high point in human civilization. So around about the 1300s, you had these great powers throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. You had the Mycenaeans, you had the Hittites, you had the Egyptians, and all these great kingdoms came to an end around 1200 BCE. So why did they come to an end? Well, we had extended droughts, we had earthquakes, we had technological changes, we had overdependence on trade. The leaders weren't as good as they once were, but where we've really focused our attention throughout the Bronze Age collapse series is the invasion of the Sea Peoples. And we focus on the Sea Peoples for a couple of reasons. One is, traditionally, they were the only reason for the Bronze Age collapse. Now, while there are other reasons given, they are, I think most people also call them the most significant, but much more importantly for World History by a Jew is these Sea Peoples are highly connected to the biblical tradition. It's more than just the Philistines, and what I've done the last two lectures is prove it's much more than the Philistines. Now it's time to take a look at another familiar slide, just to get your mind back in it, and that is the Sea Peoples broken up and their impact. So I want you to get a couple points from this slide before I move on. One is we have 9 distinct peoples named by the Egyptians, and the ones I've crossed out are the ones we've covered in a previous lecture. We're going to be covering the Denyen in this lecture. So they get the little arrow and the underline. Now, the origin of the Sea Peoples are widely identified with somewhere within the Mediterranean, more specifically the Greek and Aegean worlds. To be very general, to be more specific, modern Greece, the Aegean islands, the Crete, Cyprus, Western Anatolia, Sardinia. Their peak of invasions was 1215 to 1175 BCE. So just for simplicity's sake, just remember about 1200 BCE, a little bit after 1200 BCE. This is our primary date that you'll need to enjoy the lecture. Okay, so let's take a look at our slide. Another slide you've seen before. This one gives you another view of the Sea Peoples, but important background info before we move on tonight. So this area here on the bottom left is indicating, okay, first you have the Sea People listed. The ones that are highlighted in yellow or green are the ones that I've spoken about in a lecture, or am speaking about in this lecture in the case of the Denyen. So obviously the highlighted ones are who I'm talking about tonight. These X's indicate which pharaohs spoke about these individual sea people. We covered the Sheridan in 2 lectures ago in Z13. Luca, we covered in our last lecture in Z14. The Pelasgus or the Philistines, we talked about them in Z11 and Z12. So now we're focusing on the Denyen. What I want you to see here, I have, for tonight's purpose, specifically tonight, I have one primary point to get out of this slide, and that is the Denyen are identical in Egyptian inscriptions to the Philistines. They look like Greeks. They look like they're from the Aegean world in the same way the Philistines do. All right, so just remember that. They look like they're from the Aegean world. They, according to the Egyptians, they have a connection to the Greek world. Now I'm going to jump to our mapping the sea people in the land of Canaan. Our previous lectures have covered, we've talked about the Amalekites, so that's here. We talked about the Philistines, so here's Philistia. We talked about the Jeker people, so here's your green circle. We talked about the Sheridan and the Sherdana, that's the purple here. We're now moving to, I want to cover this whole coast. So right now we're moving towards this blue circle, but it's going to take me a couple of these little episodes to get to it. But just know that's the area of the map I'm gunning for. Just let me work my way there. These are the inscriptions the Egyptians left us dealing with the Denyen. Now, there's 2 particular sources we're focusing on at the moment. One is the Papyrus Harris of Ramesses III. So think about this as like the annals of Ramesses III. And then Ramesses III also talks about them at Medinet Habu. Medinet Habu is Ramesses III's mortuary inscriptions. So we see these people listed twice, and I want to, I've bolded how they were listed. I want to carefully look at it. The Danuna or Denyen, who are in their isles, and then it goes on to say the Jeker and the Pelasgus. Note the connection between the Denyen, the Jeker, and the Pelasgus. They're all here together in this inscription. They're grouped together because then it's the next sentence. We talk about the Shardana and the Weshesh of the sea. The foreign countries made a conspiracy in their islands. So it's important, islands, remember islands. Their confederation was the Philistines, the Jeker, the Shekelesh, the Denyen, and the Weshesh, lands united. So we have a group of people here who have some sort of origin to the islands or to the sea that are invading Egypt. Now, Dr. Eric Klein has given us a nice date of 1177 BCE. So this is the Egyptians talking about these people in 1177 BCE. My first question is, did the Egyptians ever talk about them prior to this? and there are indications that they knew of these people before the invasion of the Sea Peoples, before the Bronze Age collapse. So we're actually going to jump back in time. So right now we're 1177 BCE. Let's go to the next slide. Going back to Thutmose III. Thutmose III has his own lecture, which I repeatedly described him as being the Napoleon of pharaohs. And if you want to know about him, then by all means, go back and check that out. But you don't need to know anything about him tonight, other than to know he has a record from his annals of 1430, dated to 1437 BCE. And he lists gifts brought to him by various rulers in the Aegean. Now, looking here, so this you have kind of a specific date, and that's because we know from his annals that it's the year 42 of his reign. Okay, and I just want to look at this one line. It's a short inscription. The benevolence of the chief of Denia, silver, a jug of Keftu workmanship, along with vessels of iron. What's going on here? What this is saying, to put it in simple terms, is he's listing gifts from chiefs in the Greek world, and one of those includes a silver vessel made in Crete. The name of the people who brought this, now notice these two references, Greek world, gift from Crete, the silver jug from Crete, and it's by these Denia people. Okay. Next, let's look at Amenhotep III. Next, I want to check out this pedestal. So this is a statue base that was discovered in the 1960s. And by the way, there's a great article about it that Dr. Eric Klein wrote. You can see here, The Sailing the Great Green Sea. Those of you who've seen enough of these lectures know I really like Dr. Klein. So you can read this article that he did about 10 years ago. Well, we have this statue base, and this statue base shows bound captives with the cartouche listing their name. So each of these bound captives with the cartouche denotes a foreign place, all right? And the two foreign places I want you to look at right here to the right of the of center. The first one is Keftu, or Crete. All right, so Keftu we talked about in one of the Philistine lectures, and Keftu is coming back to us tonight. And short answer is it's Crete, and widely recognized as being Crete. The second name here is Denia. Now, Denia has been equated with the Danaoi. The Danaoi have been equated with the Denyen. So are the Denia and the Denia the same? Well, D and T are easy to be interchanged as you switch from one language to the next. And a great example of this I spoke about in the Abraham lecture, how when you take German and English, how Taler in German is dollar in English, or Tisch in German is dish in English. We have a similar idea here where the T and the D are interchangeable. So while not universally accepted, there's a pretty decent consensus that Denia could very well, Denia was a reference to the Denyen, and I think even people who don't necessarily believe it would still say there's a good chance that it is, because you have this similar sounding name. You don't have these people appear again. They're from the Aegean world. They're connected to the Greeks and the Cretans, and you put all that together, and it kind of makes sense that it's going to be the Denyen or Denia or Danaoi, whichever word we want to use. And I'm going to be throwing out those words over and over again tonight, just because my point is, once I leave the slide, we're really only be dealing with that DNN. That's the key. I had to take a little detour here to show you this earlier record. So when was this record, these two records from? And if you hadn't paid enough attention to the dates, I'm going to emphasize now. The first one from Thutmose III takes place all the way back into 1437 BCE. That would place it about 250 years before the Bronze Age collapse. And then we jump about, what is that, about 85 years into the future. And what do we have? What do you know? We have another reference to these same people. So when they come around another century and a half from 1353 BCE, the Egyptians have met them before. They don't need to introduce them, because the argument would be, hey, they already know who these people are. The next step is to see what we can find from Greece itself. Okay, so our basis is Egypt. They've introduced these people to us. I started off with giving you a Greek myth, and now I want to merge those two, these Egyptian records with this Greek myth. To do that, we need to go to Greece. We're going to take a closer look at this Danaoi, beyond just the mythological story of Danaus. When you look at Homer, he uses three collective names for the Greeks in the Iliad. One is the Aegeans, the other is the Danaoi or the Danans, which we've equated with Egypt's Denyen, and then the other is the Argives, the Argoi. Notice he only says Pan-Hellenes or Hellenes once, even though that's how we would refer to the Greeks today. As most like of these four, we would definitely use Hellenes, right? But that was not a term that was being used for the Greeks in Homer's day. You're mainly looking at Achaeans. Now, the Achaeans, which you can see, this is the number of references by Homer. So almost 600 references, by far the most, has been widely equated with the Hittites, Achiawa. Now, you can see, if you can get through my Tennessee accent, you can see the similarities between the two words. I don't think you're going to get a lot of pushback at that equation. The more controversial version of that is, are they the same as the Ekwesh? So if you look down here, the Ekwesh were another of these people mentioned by the Egyptians, and some people do think, just based on the etymology, that the Ekwesh is the same as the Achaeans. I tend not to agree with that, and the reason I tend not to agree with that is, first of all, Homer described the Achaeans as long-haired, and no one in the Egyptian inscriptions have long hair. And number two, the Egyptians refer to the Ekwesh as circumcised, and the Greeks were not known for practicing circumcision. So these two big points, one from Greek sources and the other two Egyptian sources, in my mind, would cross out the chances of the Ekwesh being the same as the Achaeans, but maybe something else will come to light to either convince me or to further reinforce my reservations in that comparison. Let's go back to our mythology. So Danaus's family, I told you they were pretty well connected. Well, his father was Belus, and Belus has been identified, or at least equated, with Baal. Now, Baal is a very, very famous pagan god that's talked about in the Bible. There's tons of archaeological references to him in the Levant. And so this is Danaus's father. Okay, so pretty good connection. His mother is the founder of Sidon in Lebanon. So, and then his one brother is the founder of Tyre, and his brother Aegyptus, yeah, I know I said Aegyptus was the king of Arabia, but after he took over Egypt, he named Egypt after himself. Obviously, if he's going to send his 50 sons to force themselves on his 50 nieces, naming a country after himself isn't too big of a deal either. All right, and now, so here's our map of Greece. I just really, I want you to get kind of a layout of Greece, but really see where Argos is. So here's Argos in Greece. So this is where Danaus fled to with his daughters when he was trying to escape his brother and his nephews. Now, if you look at a map, that makes a lot of sense, because if Danaus was in Libya at the time, and so here's Arabia, so Aegyptus comes from Arabia, invades Egypt, he's heading towards Danaus. What does Danaus do with his daughters? He just sails to the closest place in Greece across the sea, and that lands us right in Argos. All right, makes sense. Okay, I'm not quite done with the story of Danaus yet. He's about to help us a little bit more. First of all, I want to pick up a couple points to the story. I talked about a king that took in Danaus when he fled, but his name is Pelasgus. King Pelasgus, due to the etymology, has been equated with Peliset. So given that the Danans or Denyen are associated with the Peliset in the Egyptian inscriptions, isn't it interesting that this King Pelasgus was the one who was credited with allowing Danaus and his daughters to come in and settle there? So it kind of gives a connection through the Greeks, who have nothing to do, it's important to emphasize, the Greeks have nothing to do with this Peliset and Denyen connection, but yet, if you look at the etymology of this Greek story, it puts these people together if Pelasgus is connected to the Peliset, which is speculative, but interesting to think about. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the ties between the Greeks and the Egyptians/Levant world. All right. Now, the Greeks were given some the Greeks give the Egyptians or the Phoenicians some interesting credit that I should mention. First of all, Greek legend says that trade between Egypt and the Greeks started with Danaus's mission. So one part of his impact is he creates this trade, and not just trade of goods, this interchange of culture between the two. And I should mention, if you flash forward to the high point of Greek civilization, your great days of Sparta and Athens and so forth, the Greeks gave the Egyptians credit for much of their thought, much of their philosophy. And this connection started with Danaus and his mission, according to the Greeks. Okay. Also, Danaus taught the Greeks how to dig wells. Okay, that's a nice little souvenir from the mission, but it doesn't help us. The next two are going to be relevant to our whole mini-series. One is one of these very significant souvenirs of Danaus's mission is the Pentaconter. So Greek legend has it that they were taught modern shipbuilding, at least modern for them back then, that modern shipbuilding was brought to them by Danaus. And here's a Pentaconter to give you an idea of what it looked like. So that just has to do with how many, with the rows, it's the name. And this ship, which is kind of your standard imagination of a Greek ship, they actually give credit to Danaus, King Danaus, for teaching them how to build it. Very important when we talk about our islands and our ships. That's your hint. Okay, we'll talk about a lot more detail later, but you can't have these people coming from islands if they don't have ships. Number two, Cadmean writing. Now, Cadmean writing is what we call the Phoenician alphabet. So I have, and I really need to break it out to a short sometime, but if you go back to the Abraham in ancient Egypt, which is one of my earlier lectures, I go in depth about how the first alphabet was created, how it was believed to have been created in Sinai, where you have some Semitic people. They combine the idea of hieroglyphics with the idea of giving a permanent consonant value to each of the characters, and the result was the Proto-Sinaitic alphabet. And this would later become Hebrew and Phoenician. And you can see this chart, which is also in that earlier lecture, but when you line up the letters like this, look at this. So you have an ox, right, which is where we get the letter Aleph in Hebrew. And you can see the connection between, it's just on its side, right? But you can see the connection here as this hieroglyphic ox becomes the Aleph, or A, once it turns again. Or the letter Bet, which is from, Bet is from Bait, which is house in Hebrew. You can see in here it's a square house. And then it transforms over time to both the B we know from English and the Bet we know from Hebrew. And we can do this with all of them, right? So Rosh, which is head, became Resh, so that's the R sound. Or we can look at Shin, so Shin on its side becomes an S, or a sigma if you prefer in Greek. So when you line it all up, you can really see how the alphabet is connected. And I love this chart. So it's a great one for seeing the development of the alphabet. Now, what's my point? My point is that there are two stories in Greek tradition. There are two stories in Greek tradition as to how they got their alphabet. Number one is it was invented by Cadmus, who was a Phoenician prince, and he brings it over to Thebes and founds what's Thebes in Greece and brings them the alphabet. All right, that's one version of how the Greeks got the alphabet. But the other version is it was part of Danaus's mission. So when Danaus brought his daughters over to Argos, guess what? He also brought the Cadmean, the Phoenician alphabet with him and taught the Phoenicians the alphabet. So if you're giving one guy credit for creating trade between the Egyptians and the Greeks, teaching the Greeks how to dig wells, and more significantly to our story, teaching the Greeks how to build ships, and finally bringing the alphabet to the Greeks, that is a pretty significant impact on a society. All right. So let me summarize where we've gotten so far. Forgive me, I'm going to read. Danaus started an exchange of people and ideas between Egypt and Greece. He fled North Africa with his alphabet from the Levant, and his shipbuilding connects him to the sea, hence in their isles. if Danaus was originally linked to the southeastern Mediterranean, it's not surprising his people, the Denyen, would return in the Sea People's invasion. So does this sound simple, right? We have the Tanaya, which are the same as the Danaoi, which are the same as the Danuna, the same as the Denyen, if you prefer the Egyptians. They're just invaders from Greece. They had ties to the Levant, and they decided to return to the Levant during the Bronze Age collapse. Very simple, right? Wrong. It's time for us to take a trip to a different place. This time we're going to Anatolia, and we're going to the Levant. So let's say goodbye to Egypt and Greece and move on. We've spoken about the Amarna letters before. The Amarna letters are a cache of almost 400 cuneiform diplomatic documents that were found in Akhetaten. Akhetaten was the Pharaoh Akhenaten's capital, his short-lived capital. The Egyptians left behind this wonderful diplomatic archive that gives us a true picture into international diplomacy in the mid-1300s BCE. While there are, like I said, almost 400 letters to go on, I'm going to focus on one letter that was written by the king of Tyre, giving a report to the Pharaoh of what's going on in the land of Canaan. All right, and you can see, so here's the cuneiform letter, and this is going to be our main sentence here, and that is, the king, my lord, wrote to me, write to me what you have heard of Canaan, and this is the underlined sentence. The king of Danuna died. His brother became king after his death, and his land is at peace. Okay, so this sentence is very important. Take a look at the map. If you look at the question mark here, this is over at Greece, and this is a report on Canaan. So I want you to bear with me now. Just take my word for it. This king way over here in Canaan is not giving a report of what's going on in Greece to a king who lives right here. Egypt would be right here if it was on the map. Okay, wouldn't make a lot of sense. So just stay with me now. I want to focus on one area of this map. So, okay, so here, this map here is showing you, this is modern Turkey, right? This is Syria, this is modern Lebanon, and then Israel starts right here. I want to look just at this portion. Oh, by the way, that's Cyprus. I want to look at just this portion of the map. So I'm going to zoom in there. Okay, now that I've zoomed in here, I want to map these places that are listed here on the right. So let me get rid of this. I just want to look at the Amarna letter with the zoomed in map. Okay, the cities that we're going to talk about first are in red. All right, so we have Tyre, we have Sidon, we have Ugarit. Now, y'all know I love Ugarit. Ugarit keeps coming up. So we'll start off with Ugarit. Here's Ugarit in modern Syria, and then if you want to add Sidon, if you want to add Tyre, then we're talking about modern Lebanon, and if you want to talk about Kidzu, that's Kadesh. All right, Kadesh is very well known. That's about right here, and then Bir Rawaza is most likely connected with Damascus, which is down here. So what I'm saying is, I'm going to put a little red rectangle here to represent these red cities. So all these cities mentioned in red are in this red rectangle. And then we talk about the king of Danuna. Now, if you look at this, it's pretty clear that the king of Danuna was not in Greece. He had to be around here. This entire report is about different activities going on around here. Where is the king of Danuna? Let's take a closer look. This map is now going to break out these cities here with their modern names. You can thank Google Maps for this. So here we have Tyre and Sidon, Beirut, all in Lebanon, right? Here's Kadesh. And then we have Damascus. And then up here, as you move into Syria, Latakia is where Ugarit ruins are, all right? Now, I'm going to hit you with a bit of a surprise, and that is that Danuna is not in Greece. It's actually right here, Adana. I'm equating Adana with Danuna. And this is a very big step because the rest of this mini-series is going to be based on Adana being there. And I'm going to prove to you that it's there. I'm going to prove to you that the Denyen are from there. And I'm going to prove to you that it's actually connected to the Bible, that they are there. And then I'm going to link it all back to Samson. So we have a lot happening from here on out. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, I'm going to be a little bit faster, a little bit quicker turnaround with these lectures. Hope to have the next one up in 3 or 4 days. And if you have any questions, post them, and I look forward to seeing you at a future lecture.